Africa alone. Sava, Madagascar. The effects of aid cuts will be felt across the continent. John McDermott, Chief Africa Correspondent, The Economist. We can't fill the gap, sighs Seramila Teddy, the governor of Sava, a region in the northeast of Madagascar, one of the poorest countries in the world. He says that since President Donald Trump dismantled the United States Agency for International Development, hitherto America's largest vehicle for delivering foreign aid, there has been a really big impact. That is readily apparent when visiting villages in the region, where small wooden clinics are closed. American aid helped pay for health workers at the facilities. The remaining nurses cannot afford to reach such remote places, with the result that disease is on the rise, according to a local doctor. In 2026, it will become apparent that the post-Cold War era of international development is unquestionably over. The Trump administration has demanded further cuts in his proposed budget for the coming fiscal year. The largest European donors will start to dramatically curtail their aid spending too. Donor Tracker, an online tool, estimates that aid spending in real terms by the 17 largest Western donors may be more than 25% lower in 2026 than it was in 2024. Sub-Saharan Africa will be the worst affected region, according to the OECD, a club of mostly rich countries. In the long term, this could shock African policymakers into ditching the complacent approach that has long defined their policymaking. But in the short term, there will be pain in the poorest African countries, and for the most vulnerable Africans. Bilateral aid cuts, i.e., excluding reductions in aid via international bodies such as the UN, will be equivalent to more than 1% of gross national income in 9 African countries, according to the Center for Global Development, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. The largest African economies, such as Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya, will feel little macroeconomic impact. But in countries such as Malawi, Liberia, and Ethiopia, where the IMF says aid accounts for a significant share of government revenues, the reductions will put further pressure on stretched budgets. There are good reasons to be skeptical about the relationship between aid and economic growth. But few reasonable people doubt that aid spending, particularly that directed towards humanitarian relief and healthcare, saves lives. Rough estimates by Charles Kenny of CGD and Justin Sandifer suggest that Mr. Trump's proposed budget cuts put millions of lives at risk globally. Rations are already being cut in refugee camps across Africa and, as the case of Madagascar shows, healthcare is grinding to a halt in places that rely on donors for public services. Efforts are underway to plug the holes that will be left by the cuts. Bill Gates, a technology billionaire turned philanthropist, has pledged to donate virtually all of his wealth by 2045, mostly in Africa. Gulf countries may stump up more for humanitarian crises. But neither philanthropists nor rising middle powers will be able to make up the shortfall. For its part, China has shown little interest in replicating the sort of altruistic model of aid pioneered by the West, preferring a more transactional approach based on trade deals and infrastructure projects. Defining this new era will therefore be left to Africans themselves. In theory, aid cuts and the dismantling of the wider development industry, with its thousands of well-meaning but often naive technocrats, should force African policymakers to take more responsibility. For too long they have relied on outsiders to set their priorities. The end of the old era should create the space for African elites to think more ambitiously about modernizing their countries on their own terms. The challenge is that these same African elites have largely been complicit in the underperformance of their economies for many decades. The continent is entering a new phase of aid and development, but it may have to wait for a new generation of leaders for it to truly begin.